Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of GMAT Club series that we are doing with Manhattan Prep, where we have our star expert, Stacey, who's here to join us and help us resolve all kinds of queries about the GMAT test. Before we start with today's episode, I want to quickly do a recap of what we covered in episode 1 and 2, which is basically episode 1 was all about the scoring algorithms, all the anomalies that we face, the discrepancies, and how do we best prepare ourselves around these anomalies. Episode 2, we covered everything about GMAT official mock tests. And again, how do we best prepare ourselves for the mocks? This is episode 3, and today is going to be all about the buzz around the review and changing answers feature, which is a new introduction in the GMAT exam. For those of us who don't know, this feature basically allows us to change up to 3 answers in every section. And Stacey here is going to help us understand everything about this feature. And again, how do we best ensure that this works in our favor? So without further ado, let me get started. I want to start this session with my first question, which is basically about how do we, as test takers, strategically prepare ourselves in the best manner possible to use this review? Should it be something where we go from the hardest or the most difficult question, or should we focus on the early questions, or is there a different approach?
Yeah, so a couple of things just to know about the way that the feature works. So you can change an answer. You can change up to 3 answers. If you do change, like if you're on question 2 and you change that answer and then you change that answer again, that does count as 2 of your changes. So you could, this would be a bad idea, but you could change a single answer 3 times and then that would use up all of your changes. So I obviously don't recommend doing that. If you are going to change the answers, make sure that you want to change this one and then go to a different question. But yes, you can change up to 3 times. And generally speaking, there are 2 things to think about here. There's certain statistics to be aware of, or just things to be aware of based on how the question types work in terms of where you would be most likely or least likely to actually be changing from an incorrect answer to a correct answer. That can influence which kinds of questions you might go back and look at in the DI section in particular. And then there's also the personal factor of like, why are you thinking about going back to a specific question and how should you gauge that? So on the first part of it, in terms of question type, the questions where you essentially have the best odds of changing to a correct answer or even just guessing a correct answer are the choose one multiple choice questions. So this is anything in the quant section, anything in the verbal section. There's 5 answer choices. You're choosing one. Your odds are pretty good. When you start to get to some of the DI question types that have multiple parts to them, and then your odds basically go way down if you're changing your answers. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but just as an example, the 2-part question type is really the most complex in terms of the answer choices. There are 5 or 6 answers, and then you have to choose from 2 columns for each answer. So there's just a lot of possibilities. And so in that case, your chances of moving from an incorrect answer to a correct answer are a lot lower just because there are so many more options for the combination of answers that you can pick. So that's something to just think about. And then the other part of it is, what's a good reason to go back and look at a question again at the end of the test, and what's a not good reason to go back and look at a question at the end of the test. So some examples of things that are good reasons would be, I'm trying to answer this question right now, and I know that I normally can do this, but I'm blanking on something right now. There's some rule and I'm forgetting what it is or something like that. And instead of trying to agonize and figure it out right now while the clock is ticking, that's a great opportunity to use the bookmark feature and just say, okay, I'm going to let that go. I'll come back to it at the end of the test. And hopefully by then I'll remember whatever it is that I'm blanking on right now. Which on the old test, you wouldn't even have had the opportunity to do. You just would get it wrong. And that would be it, right? You wouldn't have a chance to pick that point up again at the end.
Right.
Another really good use of it is, have you ever had this happen? You submit an answer and then you're suddenly like, oh, did I pick that? Wait, I meant to pick C. Did I pick C? I might've picked B. What did I just do? Or I might've just solved for the wrong thing and you've already submitted it. That in that moment, you can't bookmark the question because you've already moved on, but you can write down the question. Right. And then you can go back at the end of the test and check it and just ease your stress. Or if you did, in fact, accidentally pick the wrong answer, you can fix it at the end. So again, this is an opportunity to pick up a point that you would have just missed on the old test. And then the third case that I think is a really good case to use this feature is when I'm looking at a question and I know that I know how to do it, but I also know that it's going to take me a while, either because it's a really hard question or it's a weakness of mine or both.
Right.
I don't want to invest all that extra time right now because I don't know what else is coming. And the penalty
Hmm.
of the test for running out of time is severe. So I really don't want to run out of time and not answer questions. And so that's a great one for, again, just bookmark and say, okay, if I have an extra 3 minutes at the end of the test, I can come back and I can do this question then, but I'm not willing to invest that right now, just in case.
Okay. Now, so as you just explained, what kind of an approach can we take as an applicant, right? And in the previous episodes, we discussed how we thoroughly had a discussion on the adaptive nature of the test, right? Since the test is adaptive, would it impact my subsequent questions if I were to change the answer early on itself? Let's say within the 10-15 minutes initial first half of the exam, I've already changed an answer. So is it going to have an impact on the adaptive nature of the test? And will it also make my subsequent questions difficult or easier, or how does it change?
So first of all, you can only change, you have to go through all of the questions first before you can go back to change an answer. So you have to get through everything and give an answer for everything before you're then allowed to go back. So essentially you have already locked in your trajectory, the trajectory of the questions that you earn before you can go back to change any answers. So it won't change anything at that point. What will happen is, so let's say you get through, let's say we're in the DI section, which is 20 questions. And so you go through all 20 questions, you get to the end. Now you'll be taken to a review screen. You can see any questions that you bookmarked. You'll see that on the review screen, but you can go back to any question. You can click into any question that you want. And so let's say you go back to question 3 and you look at it and you realize, oh, I chose the wrong answer and now I'm going to change it. And you change it from the incorrect answer to the correct answer. So what will happen with your score is you will get full credit for answering that question correctly. So for that question, like it would have been wrong. And now that you've changed it to right, there's not a penalty on that question for like, oh, but you didn't get it right until later. So we'll only give you part of the credit. They give you the full credit for that question.
Okay.
What is different essentially is if you had gotten that question right in the first place, you would have earned a different question after that, right? So because you got it wrong in the first place, you would have earned a somewhat easier question on average. If you got it right in the first place, you would earn something that was a little harder on average. And so it depends on basically what would have happened from the rest. So you can't definitely say, oh, you would have gotten a higher score because maybe you would have earned a harder question, but then that would be a different question. So maybe you would have missed that, right? So who knows what would happen after that. But in general, if you change something from wrong to right, then yes, your trajectory, there's a chance that your trajectory through the rest of the test was a little bit lower than it might have been if you had gotten it right in the first place. And when I tell people that, they immediately are like, oh, so that means I have to get it right in the first place. And then they stress out about that. And really the way to think about it is not like, oh, I have to get everything right in the first place. The strategy is still the same, which is, can I do this question in a reasonable amount of time right now? Because all the questions matter. If I spend 5 minutes to get one question right, I'm going to hurt my score because I'm going to run out of time or make careless mistakes on other things, right? So the question is still just, is the question sitting in front of me right now something that I think I can do in a reasonable amount of time? And if so, great, I'm going to do it. And if it falls into other categories, then I'm not going to get it right now, but I actually do have the opportunity to maybe pick up, like lift my score, bump my score up a little bit at the end by picking up another question or two because I figured something out or because I realized I made a careless mistake or whatever that might be.
All right. Okay. Makes sense. And since essentially all the features on the exam are meant to help us in one way or the other, right? And this answer again is like receiving another chance at a question that may have seemed difficult to some of us. Similarly, I want to know that is time management something that the feature helps us with? For example, as soon as I come across a difficult question and I know that this is going to take a while, or maybe I don't immediately recall how to go about it, should I put this aside and focus on the other manageable ones? Is that practically feasible? Or like, what's your experience with students?
So first of all, I think this is a huge help psychologically in terms of the exact issue that you're talking about, which is time management.
Hmm.
On the old
Right.
test and on most standardized tests really that function in this way, you don't get, this is the first adaptive test of this kind, a CAT test that has allowed you to go back and change answers. This is not a feature typically that you have on CATs. So they really did something innovative here in changing their test to allow this to happen. And so you just, if that was it, like you got it right or wrong and that was it. And so because you knew this was it, I had to answer the question and move on and I could never come back to it. It was really easy to hang on to the question for too long. And of course, your time is finite in each section. And so then you would
Mhm.
run out of time and you would be missing questions that were maybe easier than this one or that you knew how to do. And then that, of course, would mean that your score was lower than you were capable of earning because you'd messed up your timing, just because of this decision making and not because of your actual knowledge or your skill on the test.
Right.
And so
Right.
this feature allows you to now essentially say like, okay, I can't do this right now. Like right now, this is not going to happen. Or if I stay on this question right now, I'm risking other questions.
Hmm.
So
Right.
I can go ahead and just bookmark this. I'll make a, you still have to guess something because you can't go to the next question until you answer this one. But it's okay. I'm going to let that go psychologically because I know I can come back to it at the end. And maybe by then I'll have settled down a little bit or I'll have remembered something and maybe I'll have a chance at that point. But at least it allows me to more, not easily because this test is still stressful, but to more easily say, okay, I'm going to let this go and come back to it at the end. And so if you can train yourself to do that, and you do still have to train yourself, it's not easy, but if you can train yourself to do that, then you're going to reduce the chances that you really mess up your timing and just kill your score because of that.
Okay. So, um, what you've mainly covered is about the positive impact that this has, right? How the feature helps us in a positive way, psychologically speaking. But have you come across negative impacts, or is there a negative effect that this feature could possibly have on an applicant during the test?
I think for most people, the possibilities are positive here. I could imagine some scenarios where somebody is so panicked that they just start bookmarking everything, but you can only go back and change 3 questions
Yeah.
at the end. So like you can't use it too much, that kind of thing. Or that you start doing something where you start just rushing and then making careless mistakes, thinking I need to save enough time at the end to make sure that I can go back. So then you start shortcutting yourself in the middle of the test.
Right.
Then that increases careless mistakes. All of these things are essentially time management strategies that you have to be able to train yourself on and execute well on throughout the test. The same was true on the old test as well. So there are things like that. That's what practice tests are for, and really testing out the different kinds of ways that you can make decisions and spend your time on the test ahead of time so that you have a really good plan and you know what works for you before you go into the official test. On the whole, though, I do think that this feature is a positive feature if you train yourself properly and learn to use it in the way that it's good for you.
All right. And do you think, I mean, it's been a while since the feature was introduced, right? So since then on, do you think that students have been using this feature effectively? Is there data or some kind of proof that you have through which you can back saying that on an average, what happens? Do students go from changing an incorrect answer to the correct answer, or is it vice versa? And we
Right.
mess up
What if you change a correct answer to incorrect?
to an incorrect answer? Yeah.
Right. So there is actually data on this. I was at a conference last fall where GMAC presented data on actual students who've been taking the exam.
Hmm.
And so in their analysis that they did, they included anyone who who got to the end of a section and still had at least 2 minutes left on the clock. So if that was the case for that section, then your data went into this study that they did.
Okay.
And the data was really interesting in terms of the differences in the different question types and where this really helped and where it kind of didn't help, that sort of thing. So of this group I don't know how many people were in the set that they did this on, but they presented the data in October of last year, which was almost a year after the test launched. So there should have been pretty good,
Right.
pretty good data in that set. And so of the people who had at least 2 minutes remaining in at least one of their sections, when they got to the end of the set for the first time, more than 70% of people did go back and look at least one question in that section. So the majority of people are actually going and looking, at least. They may or may not change the answer, but they're at least going and looking at questions again.
Right.
The data also showed that most people who did go back and look at questions, they went back and looked at between 1 and 3 questions in the section. Again, just looked at, didn't necessarily change them all. And the interesting thing is, although they went and looked back on average at 1 to 3 questions, they only changed an answer for about 15 to 20% of the questions that they went back and looked at. So sometimes I think people are using, I certainly did this during my test. I went back and would check something and then be like, oh, okay, no, I'm okay. I don't need to change my answer. I was actually right. Like, I'm okay. So there are people going back clearly and using this feature just to double check and feel reassured that, okay, I feel good about that answer and I'm going to leave that answer in. Then when you had people changing answers, so here's where the data gets especially interesting. So they tracked whether people changed from incorrect to correct, from correct to incorrect, or from incorrect to incorrect, meaning you were just wasting your time because you were already wrong to something else that was wrong. So for all of the questions, and then they did this by question type. And I can't share the exact data with you. I can talk about it, but we can't share like the exact numbers. But
right.
I can summarize. Right. So for across all of the question types, the average, like a percentage changing from correct to incorrect, meaning you had it right, but you just turned it to a wrong answer. It was less than 22% for every single question type. So it was like 10% to 20% essentially for every question. So most of the time we're not actually changing from correct to incorrect, which is good news. So in general, I interpret that as, okay, trust your instincts. If you want to change an answer, it's okay. You're probably not changing it from a correct answer to an incorrect answer. So, okay, go for it. Change your answer. The other interesting thing, though, was that the data for the data for the other 2 points, which was incorrect to incorrect or incorrect to correct, and this differed depending on the question type in terms of how effective it was or how likely you were to be changing to a correct answer versus simply changing to another incorrect answer, meaning you were wasting your time. So basically, on both of the verbal question types, on critical reasoning and reading comp, and in the quant section on problem solving, there was really, it was fine. Like most of the time, people were actually changing to correct answers. There were still a decent percentage changing from incorrect to incorrect, whatever. But most people were actually changing from incorrect to correct. So on those question types, great. People are making good calls and like feel confident. And this is what I was talking about before of like these question types are just the one multiple choice, one answer out of 5 answer choices. Choose one, that sort of thing. When you get to the DI section, the data is a little messier. If you are reviewing a 2-part question, so what they showed was people changing 2-part or changing a graph or table question. You were actually most likely to be changing from incorrect to incorrect.
Oh.
It's completely wasting your time. Like, right? You already had it wrong and now you're just getting it wrong again. So totally wasting time to go change unless you feel really confident. So I would say if you know you made a careless mistake, go ahead and confidently fix it and change it if you know.
Yeah.
But if you're like,
yes,
no, maybe it's that, stop, don't do that. Ignore that. The other 2 question types, so data sufficiency was like critical reasoning and reading comp in those ones and problem solving, which didn't surprise me because that's also just a one choice, multiple choice. The interesting thing was MSR, was also classed with data sufficiency where people were more like, your odds were better to change from incorrect to correct on MSR.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That was super interesting. So I was like, okay, so if you're on DI and you're debating, like I've got, these 3 questions that I can go back to, and which one should I go back to first? If it's an MSR question or DS question, prioritize those. Prioritize going back to those over the other ones. The only exception I would say to that is, again, if you realize you have made a careless mistake, like you made a mistake and got something wrong, you know exactly what it was. Obviously, those are the first ones that you would go back to and fix. But after that, if it's more like I want to check and see and I'm not sure, then in the DI section, prioritize DS and MSR over the other question types.
So DI section has proved to be the most helpful when it comes to this entire feature.
I think so. I do, again, I think there are still reasons for the feature outside of this data that we're talking about. Simply, again, if you make a careless mistake, you can now go fix it. Or if you're blanking on something, I think we've all experienced that, where you forget something in the moment, and then 5 minutes later, you're like, oh, I remember, and now you can actually go back and fix it. So, that's good too. But yeah, in terms of, I was really surprised about the data that MSR, it actually helps, because MSR, everybody hates MSR. So.
Okay. But yes, I'm pretty sure that many student applicants like me were surprised to hear that DI is actually the section that could be your most useful section when it comes to this entire feature. And for those of you who joined us in the last few minutes, we are discussing everything about the feature, which allows you to change your answers and also review some of them, which is basically up to 3 answers in every section of the GMAT exam. This is episode 3 of the GMAT series that we're doing with Manhattan Prep, and we have Stacey here. Make sure that you subscribe, like the video, give us feedback, put in your questions in the chat box. As soon as we are done with our list of questions, we will be sure to take yours from the chat section. With that, almost nearing the end of the session, the question that I would like to ask now is about the official mock tests that we have, and also the mock exams provided by Manhattan Prep, right? Do we have the review feature available on both these platforms?
So Manhattan Prep, we don't have our own exams anymore. We actually use the official exams for all of our programs. We buy them for our students because we think those are the best exams, and we think they're the best exams because they're literally they're exactly
official gospel. Yes,
exactly. So they do use the algorithm that's used in the real test. They do have the review feature. The screen is exactly the same. The features are exactly the same as the real test. They are using official past test questions, right? Everything is basically exactly the same, except it's not actually the real test. So your practice test scores can't actually go on your record. But other than that, yeah, the official practice tests function exactly the same way as the real test.
All right. Okay. We will just wait for a few minutes. Everyone watching, if y'all have any questions relevant to the topic that we just discussed, which is basically the feature that allows you to change your answers, review your answers, how do you best make this feature work in your favor? This is basically the topic of the chat session. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. Send us feedback or any other questions you may have pertaining to the GMAT exam. This is the time to drop in your chat boxes, and we'll be sure to take them ahead.
And while we're waiting for questions to come in, I'm going to mention something too about one of the stats that I gave earlier when I talked about people changing from correct to incorrect. And I mentioned the 22% figure. It wasn't 22% on average for everybody. It was 22% or less. So depending on the question type, there were some question types where the changing from correct to incorrect was only like 5 to 10%. So in the worst case scenario, it's only a 22% chance of changing from correct to incorrect. And in most of the question types, it was actually even less than that. It was actually better. So don't worry. A lot of people are stressed about like, what if I'm changing from a correct answer to an incorrect answer? It's from GMAC's own data. It's really not happening very much at all. So don't stress about that.
All right. And since we did have a detailed discussion on the DI section particularly, but Anish here has a question. Is it a good strategy for DI, particularly for MSRs, as they take a lot of time? So we know that MSR is something that already is quite a big challenge for most of us.
I think, yeah.
And it comes with a lot of anxiety. So on top of that, should we stress even more by going back, reviewing, changing?
Yeah. So initially, I might have said, like before I saw the data from GMAC, I might have said like, MSR, it depends on how you felt about the passage. Still use the same criteria I was talking about. Do you think you made a careless mistake? Do you think you blanked on something? Whatever. But now that I saw the data that said that MSRs and DS were the two DI question types where you were most likely to be changing from incorrect to correct. Okay, well, then I guess we don't worry about that piece of it, right? Like if you think that there's a good reason to go back and want to look at an MSR question, absolutely go back and look at it. The other thing I will sometimes get, and Anisha, I'm not sure if this is what you were referring to, is some people will say like, oh, should I just skip all 3 immediately to start and then come back to those 3 at the end? So just guess immediately on those and come back. We are balancing this strategy with the fact that how you do the first time impacts your trajectory through the subsequent questions on the test. So I don't actually recommend that you just automatically decide that you're going to skip and guess immediately on the MSR questions and come back to them at the end. Just like any question, you still want to evaluate what's in front of you and just see, based on this material, how comfortable do I feel and do I think I can do this? MSRs do take a lot of time, but you also, because it's 3 questions, you do have a block of time that you can spend there. And so maybe it's the case that if you find the prompt really confusing, maybe you take the block of time that you have for the entire MSR and you only use it to answer 2 of the questions. And then maybe the third one you guess to catch back up on time, and you come back to that one at the end or something like that. So that might be one way to do it if you're worried about the time there.
All right. Okay. And another question that we had, again, I feel like DI section really just causes a lot of anxiety, since it has a lot of quant as well as yes, and it's also quite wordy, so it has a good mixture of both. So there's one more question, which is from Krishnan, where he's asking, please can you suggest some good study materials for the DI section? Yes. Along with Manhattan Prep, obviously, but apart from that.
So the 2 ways that you want to think about studying for anything on the test are, you need to learn any content or any strategies. And then you also need to practice those things until they become second nature in your brain, so that you can actually do them and do them relatively efficiently on the test when the clock is ticking. So in terms of, I'm going to start with the second half of that, which is simply practice. The best practice is the real thing in general. So if you don't already have it, you definitely want to be using the official guide or any other official materials. They do have, there's actually 4 official guide books. So there's a big one that contains all the question types, but then they have smaller supplemental ones that are one for each section. So there is a DI book specifically that is only DI questions. So I would recommend those in terms of your practice, because the best thing is to practice with the real questions. In terms of learning the skills and the strategies and the facts and the rules that are tested, that's more likely to come from like a test prep company. It just is, right? The real test makers are giving us all these great materials about their tests, but then their business is not to teach you how to get better at their own test, right? They're just giving the test. So what you're looking for in terms of DI, as Shreya already said, it's like, right, you need to know all the math, facts, and rules. You need to know the verbal, the different kinds of strategies, what kinds of arguments might you see, and what are they, or when are they asking you to infer versus strengthen versus whatever, and how do you do that? What are the trap answers? So basically all of the skills that are tested on both the quant and verbal sections, those come into play on DI. And so you basically want material that's teaching you all of the stuff that's tested on the test. As an example, for our company, we've got books. So we've got an all the quant and DI book, and we've got an all the verbal book, and that teaches you basically all the question types and all the skills. And then in our classes, we combine those with the official guide to practice and do problem sets and really hone those skills. And I really do think that that's the way to go. You learn the skills and the concepts, and then you go practice that in test-like conditions and timed conditions with official material.
Okay. And we have another question with someone who's just 6 days away from appearing for their exam. Aditya is asking, my GMAT is 6 days away from today. What should be my final strategy? Should I attempt one more mock?
Yeah, first of all, good luck. It's definitely stressful knowing the test is coming up. If you would like to take one more practice test, you can, but I want you to take it today or tomorrow. I don't want you to take a practice test within 5 days of the real thing. And that is simply because if you're going to take a practice test, you're doing it to get something out of it, right? You're going to go analyze it, and you're going to say, okay, this is how I want to do this again, this same way on test day, but this other thing over here, I want to change. I want to guess when I see something like this on test day, or this is the kind of thing that I want to go back to at the end of the section. So you need to give yourself time to analyze coming out of that test and then to do something with the data. So that's why I say don't take a practice test right before the real test. The other thing is you don't want to take a practice test like the day before the real test, simply because it's mentally draining to take a practice test. So you're resting in the couple of days before the practice test. You want to rest your brain. The other thing to be doing in these 6 days is a general review of what I'm going to call the major facts and rules, the major strategies. You don't need to go and, remind yourself of like what the quadratic formula is, because you're almost certainly not going to get a question that needs it. But you do need to know how to translate words into an equation. You do need to know how to answer strengthen questions or weaken questions. So you're not looking to try to get all the little obscure facts and rules and details and strategies now. You're trying to do a general review like you're studying for a final exam, where you're reviewing and practicing the things that you're most likely to see. And then just remember the night before, the day before, get your ID and whatever else. If you're going to a testing center, whatever you want to bring with you to the testing center, just get that all ready the night before. Wear layers. This is if you're testing at home or in a testing center, so that you can, without leaving your seat, you can take off or put on a sweater or something like that if you're too hot or too cold. And the other thing I really strongly recommend is try to go to bed and get up at the same time every day this week that you want to go to bed and get up the night before your test and the day of your test. So just get into a really consistent sleep schedule. You may find the night before that you can't fall asleep, or that you're waking up in the middle of the night, or you're waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning or something like that because you're nervous. So you may find that you don't get great sleep the night before. If you've been getting good sleep for the whole week, you're going to be okay with one night of not great sleep. So just get yourself into a good, consistent strategy, sleep schedule the week before to help your brain process. And good luck.
I think that was a comprehensive list of everything that one needs to know right before appearing for their exam. But I'm pretty sure at least everyone who's in India, and my presumption here that Aditya is in India, it's too hot here. We cannot wear any more layers than we're already wearing. It's just unbearable heat. But apart from that, everything else.
Right. It's March for you. Where I am, it's winter right now.
Oh, yes. We practically don't have winters here anymore. It's just too hot all the time. One specific question for Manhattan Prep, actually. It's about how many DI questions are in Manhattan's dynamic question set builder. This is something you would know.
Yes. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I'll find that out. And I'll let you know, and then you can post it. Yeah, total, I know that there are about like 1,300 questions in the question set builder overall. I don't know exactly how many of them are each of the different question types, though. I'll find out.
All right. There was one more particular question that I think we could take and then maybe end. I believe we briefly covered this, but maybe just for the purpose of being specific, is there any penalty for changing answers from correct to incorrect?
So essentially, yes, because if it had been correct, you would have gotten credit for getting it right. And if you change it to incorrect, you're now not getting credit for that question. So it won't change. There's no penalty assessed on top of that. They're not both going to take credit away from that question and say, and you changed it, so I'm going to continue again. But yeah, if you had left it, you would have gotten credit for getting it right. And if you change it, then yes, you will no longer get credit for getting that question right.
All right. I believe when they say penalty, the usual way are like we're conditioned to believe that there's a negative marking, or like it goes and record in the separate section. Yeah.
They're not going to like on top of that give you some other penalty. It's just you'll no longer get credit for getting that question right.
All right. Okay, this is just one more question about, again, someone who's 5 days away from their test this time. I took a test today, 4th. I believe it was the 4th test, maybe. And it was their second time. Okay. I'm considering taking the 6th test in 2 days. Sounds like that could be too tiring.
There are probably people in the world for whom that would be okay. I'm not one of them. And I tell all of my students, I literally just had a class session, a last class session with students last night. And I told them that they are forbidden from taking a practice test within 5 days of the real test.
Wow.
That's my
Okay.
party line is you do not take a full-length practice test. If you want to do some practice, you could take a practice test and split it up into sections. Do one section today, another section tomorrow, that sort of thing. But don't take a full practice test within a few days of the real test.
All right. I think that's about it. I have tried my best to make sure that all questions go answered. And if not, if by chance we have missed out on your question, be sure to scroll through the entire episode, go back and check. There's a good possibility that we have already covered something relevant to what your doubt may have been. For everyone who's here with us, thank you so much for joining in. This was the third episode that we're doing with Manhattan Prep. And today we covered everything to do with the review, with the feature that allows you to review your answers as well as go back and change. I hope that the session was helpful. Please give us your feedback. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Give us press the like button. Like I said, put in your queries in the chat box, and we'll be sure to take them ahead in the next episode. But stay tuned. 2 weeks later, then on the next Wednesday, we'll be doing another session, and again, we will be covering the remaining topics, which could be probably about what to do if your test gets flagged for review, how to cope with something like that. You can also check out the first two episodes, which was about the scoring anomalies, and the second episode that we did, which had everything to do with the GMAT mock tests. Thank you so much for joining in. Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you.
And looking forward to doing the next session with you. Thank you so much.